There we go. All right. Well, I want to welcome you all, both people who were at Boot Up, Ghia Map, and Ghia Map, as well as the people who were at Boot Up, such as B-57, Project Gamma, and a few other people who may or may not show up here. Hopefully we'll get a few more people, because I'm pretty sure I sent out about invitations to about 30 validated email addresses. So I would hope we will get some more. Now, as far as the sequence of events went on, I think that Bill Herring is of the people we've got here, is one of the earliest people. When there's nobody here from the very early period, or not that early. Wait a minute, is that Dick Nugent coming in?
Well, I didn't catch that.
There's another person coming on whose name is Dick. I think that's Dick Nugent. What Dick are you?
Yeah, I can't remember him. Yeah.
Dick?
Yes.
Don't remember him.
What's your last name? Nugent?
My name's Turlikowski.
Oh, Turlikowski, yeah. We have a lot of Richards around here. Well, you're not Richard Nugent. However, you'll have to fit in because you came over on his team, I believe.
Yes.
So that makes you the earliest person here that was at that camp. So why don't you start out by telling us when you arrived and what happened, because you got to some interesting times at that point.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, you came in with Richard Nugent.
Yes.
And that team that team replaced the TDY team at Boot Up.
Yes.
And then there's some switching of teams around at that point. Stokes and other things happened. And then the sort of people come on to Ghia Map, and I think that Ghia Map or the Boot Up team was involved. Your team was involved specifically in July when Boot Up was hit pretty hard.
Yes, Boot Up, I believe, was hit in July 20th of 1965. I was the half of the team that was in Ghia Map.
Okay, so the team was split between those two locations. How far apart were they?
Long damn way. About a 20-minute helicopter ride.
That far?
Yeah.
And then you ended up, rather than closing Boot Up, you closed Ghia Map and brought your assets back to Boot Up.
Correct.
What was the logic behind that if your camp had already been hit once?
Frankly, I'm not sure. I was on the bottom of the totem pole, so I just did what I was told.
You were a radio operator over there?
No, I was demo.
Demo. Okay. What were you facing when they hit the camp? Who was it? NVA or VC?
MVA, I think, like I say, I wasn't at Boot Up at the time.
Okay. Wade, when did you get there?
August or September of '68.
Yes, that's a ways beyond that. We'll come back to that. Bill was there before then, right? Bill Herring?
Yes. I was there, I think, July '68. Something about that. I was only there, I guess, about 3 months. I went in there. I only saw two people on that list that I recognize the name is a Lieutenant Paul and a Sergeant Dion. Stayed on operation most of the time. In fact, we went up to the border, and 3 or 4 of us crossed the river and went over into Cambodia and walked around our little ways and come back. But you know, that camp is underground. You got a cement roof over it. I mean, it's underground, and the only thing up above the ground was a mess hall. So all our sleeping and everything was done underground. We sat up on top of that thing at night, and we see truck lights coming along from Cambodia. We see the truck lights, and they, I guess they unloaded people, and they probably came down between us and the other camp over towards Song Bay River. But we found that trail. It was under a triple canopy jungle there, and it was just like a highway down through there. And all hard surface and everything, and they come down through there on have bicycles loaded with rice and pushing them bicycles. And we set up an ambush, and we a little patrol little group came through there, and I think we killed most of them, but I don't know if we probably left some of them dead. But we as soon as we saw them, we got out of there because we knew it was somebody else following them. I wouldn't let anybody mess with them because sometimes they heard that they booby trapped themselves, put hand grenades on them and everything. So I wouldn't let anybody touch them. We just moved on out of there, got out of there. You're only there with a few men anyway. You don't have very many people to fight. That's where they came through there. They crossed that river from Cambodia and come down through there.
Was that what they called Sergei's Jungle Highway?
Probably. I don't know. It was like a highway.
But I thought that was further over by Chilin. But,
Yeah.
So Wade got there just a little bit after you got there. Wade was with B-57. You were running. Bill Herring was the intel sergeant for the team. You were running Asian networks. Is that correct?
Right, yeah.
So what did you get from your networks?
Yeah, when, in 68, 69, well, later in 69, things started to heat up at Boot Up again. But from 67, when the camp was almost overrun, I think it was November 67, things started to quiet down. So, the NVA were very active in the district. And so there was not a hell of a lot of collection that we were doing. But nonetheless, we were sending agents across the border and trying to get whatever it is that we could. So, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Wade, go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, it was in the late spring of 69 when things started to heat up again. And we got a VIP code for a guy coming in. It turned out to be a brigadier general walking with a cane. So he came in, Roger Dion was the team sergeant, and Paul Fager was the XO. The camp commander at that time would, I think he was out on a mission anyway. So Fager was rather new and stumbled at the briefing, and the brigadier, understood, asked him how long he had been there, and Paul stated how long he had been there. So the brigadier, knowing something about SF, turned to Roger Dion and asked Roger then to give the rest of the briefing. At the end of the brief, he looked at us and he said, "What do you guys say if I told you the 9th NVA division was across the border and getting ready to come across?" And we said, "Holy shit." So at that point, yeah, he arranged, we had a conventional engineer platoon come in. They put in an anti-tank minefield. They did other kinds of things around the camp. And we got prepared for the 9th NVA coming across. I regret that I was pulled out to go back to Nha Trang and become the P57 op sergeant, and before the action really started. But it got hot and heavy in '69. But they never took much of the camp, if anything, like they did in '67 and '65. So we were pretty lucky during that time I was there. Very limited action, if you will.
Sidney,
Yeah,
you were there at the same time as Wade or a bit after?
no, I was there afterwards. I was,
Have you frozen up?
like I said, I was there later than Wade. I was there with John Anderson. I
Okay.
was his radio operator.
Yeah. I think, Sid, you came in after Carl Hargis. We had Jim
Yeah.
Paris, and then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had been over at Tantry 414 prior to that, and after that, because of over that, I moved to Buda.
Right.
Mike, when did you get there? Mike Parks?
I just joined. My audio is not working very well. I got there about August of '68.
Okay, this is about the time we're talking about right now.
Paul Fager and I got there on the same day.
Okay. And Eddie, you were just coming in at that point.
Yeah, I had about a
Yeah.
month in country, something like that.
So what happened when you got there?
The first day, we got signed in, and about a half an hour later, one of the operations got ambushed down by district headquarters, and they brought in a 3-quarter, and there were 3 dead CIDG in the back. So my first day, I got to see 3 dead guys face to face. I remember that.
And that was in August of '68.
August of '68, approximately. Might have been the end of July, but between August and July, roughly.
I have Roger Dion getting a Bronze Star with V on the 28th of August.
Uh-huh. I've got a laptop going and my audio is out. I can just barely hear you. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, we're here. I'm hearing you fine. I don't know how other people are making out, but I'm hearing you fine.
I was trying to find some auxiliary speakers and I can't find them.
Eddie, you're next up. You came in about that time.
I'm sorry.
Eddie Escala.
Well, I didn't get that.
No, I'm talking to Eddie
Oh,
Escala.
okay.
Got in there in late August, I believe, of 70.
Oh, 70. Okay, that's
Yeah, it's 70.
That's much later. Kirk Hillingstad. He's got big audio problems. We're not hearing him. Rip, I had to silence you there for a while because you had some background noise. So why don't you unmute yourself? If you don't know how to do it, call your.
All right.
There you are. Okay.
What was your question?
I would say chronologically, you're probably next.
Probably so, pretty close. I got there in, I want to say June or July, 69.
69. Okay. So we're moving up another year. Do you have any stories about what happened in the interim in early 69 and when you got there, what happened?
Things were pretty quiet around there for 3 months before I got there.
Okay.
And then, yeah, my first operation out of there was, back to the northeast. And had a very dear friend, Jack Stewart, who was with the C-Team Mike Force that had been deployed up there in 65 or 66, somewhere in that range. And they had gotten ambushed on that airstrip up there, probably southwest of Duke Falls. Anyway, I took an operation out, my first operation, up into that area just to see what it was all about. Jack was a very close friend. Anyway, we got up there and found out where it all happened, found all kinds of stuff laying around, along with a, what do you call a boa constrictor. And we put that sucker on an aircraft, on a helicopter coming back to boot up. Had a good friend, Dennis Lidd, who was sitting on that basket that boa constrictor was in, and he didn't know it. So when we got to boot up, he got off and he said, "What's in the basket, Rip?" And I said, "Beats the hell out of me." And he lifted the lid, and there's this snake looking him right in the eye. It's funny. Denny has never forgiven me. But things went along pretty good. Not too much going on that time until, I'm guessing, late September, early October. I don't remember. Ken Hull was my ex, and he took an operation out. Like I say, I think it was October, and they ambushed a platoon of MVA that had set up in the rubber, and Ken got the Silver Star out of that. They got a good body count, and it just seemed like all we did was piss them off, because they started hitting us pretty hard from a distance. A lot of mortar attacks. They had machine gun emplacements set up around our airstrip. We had to tell the air crews not to approach from the north and not to take off to the north because of all the machine gun fire. And that worked until somebody didn't believe us, and we lost a C-130 in the wire. And I was out on that operation. We wiped out a 51 cal position. And that would have been in, again, like I say, October of 69. I'm trying to remember, Lopez, I think, was my radio operator. Gifford, who had been the medic, left and went back to the B team at B-34. And you told me who my medic was the other day. I don't remember.
Noise.
Yeah, that's him.
Okay.
Yeah. I had Van Dusen as a team sergeant. He had his problems. And then Stubby Smith. I can't remember his first name, but I remember three
James.
fingers of his right hand were cut off.
That's
And
what-
he was my intel guy. I just can't remember the name, Steve.
Renteria and Blair were Stetter.
Blair sounds familiar. What about an engineer? I'm sorry.
Engineer, possibly Bisbee or OJ Jones. The engineer, I really don't know. It's whoever
O.J. Jones.
before Bisbee. I'm missing somebody there. Now, when you talked about setting up a machine gun in a rubber plantation, you're talking about this area here, just northwest of the camp,
Yeah,
northeast of the camp.
northeast of the camp.
As with other rubber plantations throughout Vietnam, they pretty well were sacred territory. You couldn't mess around with them, and the other guys could.
Well, as far as we were concerned, that was BS because boy, they set up in the rubber. When they moved in on us and actually had some ground probes in November of 69, they came right out of the rubber to the south.
Be down over here.
No, back up here. Where's Bodut? Yeah, they were in there and
Bodut down here.
I believe you're right. I forget what I'm looking at here. Yeah, they set up down here, and they had fortified positions like you wouldn't believe.
Now, just to put things in perspective here, it's perhaps a little bit too much perspective, but if you can't hear the border's over there, two directions, you got the border.
Yeah.
Let me make a little.
Where they set up was about 2 or 3 clicks southwest of the camp. More south.
Go back to the larger view.
Okay. We gotta go up with it. The French plantation headquarters was, a couple of clicks from the camp.
In what direction?
It would have been south.
What is this right here on the south end of the runway?
What is it? It was a machine gun position.
No, no.
51 cal.
Okay. So was a particular cross-border threat coming in from the north or from the west?
It was coming in from the west.
And how far west of the camp did you operate?
To the border.
To the border?
Yes, sir.
How about what was the next camp to the west?
It would have been the next camp to the north would have been Duke Thumb. The
Okay.
next camp to the south was out of Tain Inn. I forget now which one that was.
Was it Tonlachon?
That
I don't know.
The north of been Buprang, I think.
well,
Buprang is in 2 Corps.
Right.
Duke
We
Thumb-
were the northern camp in 3 Corps. And to the west of us was Loch Nin.
Southwest.
Southwest. Yeah, that's about right.
Down the border.
Yeah.
all right.
Between us and Buprang was an uninhabited area. There used to be an old camp there called Buchai, I think, been overrun with flamethrowers, and nobody dared go there.
That Ghia Map.
Okay, we call it Bujai, I think.
Well,
There was a Bujai and there was also a Buja Map. And
Right.
one was to the west. Buja Map, I think, one or the other was to the west on the border past Boduk district. But the one I'm talking about that was towards 2 Corps had been overrun in 67, I think, with flamethrowers. And it was a heavily fortified area. There were concrete bunkers and things up there. We heard from other people that went there.
well, let's see if I can bring this back. All right, this is Ghia Map. And the 2 Corps, 3 Corps border is right here.
Okay.
You can see how close it was.
Yeah, okay, that's it. That's the one, yeah.
So that
And there had been a bridge where Highway 14 Alpha crossed the river, and the team from A-341, before I got there, blew it up. We went up there and looked at it one time. It was a good-sized bridge, and it was totally wrecked.
on in this area.
Yeah, it was Highway 14 Alpha, I think they called it, went past Budap and up across the border. And there'd been a bridge there, and the guys from 341 destroyed that bridge, probably in 67, I think.
Okay, so where's 14 Alpha?
Yeah, it was early 68. It crossed the Song Bay River.
It was the river to Cambodia, the border river.
Okay, I'm back again here. What happened to my picture? Work on that one. All right,
Oh,
here we go. All right, Eddie, you're the last guy who was there. You held the fort until the border rangers came in.
Yeah, I got there in late August in 70, and it was pretty routine. I was a capo officer and wasting time with Chuhois in the jungle and all that stuff.
I've lost you, Steve.
All that stuff. But also running local recon and then as October start getting hot, and we knew something was up because you got up one morning, all the mountain yards, all the kids were gone, all the mamasans were gone, and all we had is our CID gear, and we knew it was coming. And I can't remember, it was late October, early November, and Captain Longo called me in his office, and he told me intelligence has it that they're coming across. We're the last camp. They're going to overrun us to make a statement. And so he gave me the briefing, and he says, put your team together. And I got Harwood to come in, and he said, give me your IDs, everything clean. He went in the safe, gave me a blue book, head towards the border, find them. So we just, next morning, first thing off, got our 2 radio guys, Harwood, me, and another 4 guys. And we headed toward the border. And we must have gone in. I don't think we crossed the border, but we pretty damn close. We could hear noises. We heard this, we heard that, we heard trucks at night. And then out of nowhere, I was switching. Harwood and we run switch tail and point every day. And I was running point, and I saw a clearance, and I walked into an NBA kitchen. Walk pots, I'm telling you, at least a meter across each one of them. Tunnels all over the place. No grease in the walk pots. They weren't rusted at all. I said, we found them. This is where they're going to start from to make a run at us. It'll feed a company of people. And Harwood dropped me in the tunnels, and I went in there, and I said, pull me out. So we started backing off, and every day on the radio, they chip me. We never talk, never press to talk. They chip me on the radio, and I do 2 chits back, means I'm okay. If they chip me again, press to talk. So at this point, we found them. We knew what they're going to do, so we backed off. And I don't think we backed off not even a click. And there's still some monsoon still coming around. And they hit me on the radio. Chit, 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 chit again. That means I got to talk to them. So I went on the radio. I said, I forget, there were George Insel. My call sign was Green Onion. And I said, George Insel, Green Onion over. He says, Onion, would you go a quarter, drop me a nickel, give me a penny? So I changed frequencies because we know they have our radios. So we changed the frequencies, and he says, Onion, get out your blue book. And I got up my blue book. Hart was there with the flashlight, it was dark out. You're surrounded. So what are we going to do? It's night. We're not going to make a night move. So in the morning, we caloried up and we made our run. And it had to be, I don't know, it took a good 12 hours of nonstop running. And we could hear them behind us. So I got back into camp, and we were just wrung out, throwing water on top of us. And I go back to my bunk and took my shirt off. And the captain calls to me, Escala, get over here. He called me in the radio room on a ham radio, to Guam. Get out your map. Tell me exactly where you ran into him. Exactly. So I gave him the coordinates where the NBA kitchen was. Gave him the coordinates where we heard them behind us.
Talking about me.
And I told them, we don't have 8 hours. They're coming across. 7 hours later, B-52s start coming in. In a day and a half, we called in 9 sorties. And just blew the whole place up. So, after that, some saw guy came in there to do the B-52 assessment, which they do all the time. And he came out, and I overheard him, the captain said, they're gone. They're all gone. Shit was in the trees. And after that, we're out of there. We start shutting it down in December, and I left for B-43 with Harwood first week on January 15th. And Harvard went MIA the first day I got there. So did the Major Leary and 3 other Special Forces guys. Welcome to B-43. But overall, that's just a little summary.
When did the arc light come in? What about
What date?
approximately? Yeah.
I can't, it was window is probably the last week in October or the first or second week in November.
That late.
Yeah. And we had the intel, they were there, but we had to touch them. You don't get, if you don't touch them, they won't put it in there. And we found them.
Well, I did a little bit of work here about a year ago with the Vietnamese who became a border ranger trooper. And we went through all the camps, and a series of little books we've done on Vietnam for each year. But VUDOP became the 97th Border Ranger Battalion. And unlike most of the camps, that seems to have been disbanded pretty quickly after you left, because we don't even have a record of the date. Other camps, you know, like Trang Sup was deactivated in 71. We know that. But in the case of VUDOP, it just falls off the records. Some of the other camps were really surprising. Tanglashan, for example, lasted into 1974, and they went through about a 6-month siege, which was quite something considering that they were being run by the same LLDB officers, just wearing different color berets.
Red berets.
So, well, we went through the chronology here. I haven't heard from Kirk, and that's probably he's not hearing all that well. Kirk, you want to put a word in edgewise here? You've got no volume whatsoever. Well, we're really not hearing you on that. So we'll have to save that for another occasion. Rip, you told me
Yes, sir.
that Hull got a silver star, but all I've got is a bronze star for him. Are you pretty sure
It
about
was an impact award, Steve.
But the bronze star was the impact award?
No, the silver star was an impact award.
Okay, well, that had come out of a different command. That's probably why I didn't have it. He got an award on November 3rd, 1969. He got a bronze star with V.
Okay.
But to silver star.
How are you?
Go ahead, let me handle this call here.
Steven, can you hear me?
Oh, there's the judge. All's okay for tomorrow.
If I have to disappear to handle the phone, Rip, just fall in there and keep the conversation going.
Okay, in November of 69 is when VUDOP went under siege again. And we had Ola Mize's Mike Force come in and reinforce us. And then we had a brigade, I want to say from the Cav, that came up and reinforced us. And this all took place in late well, mid-November 1969. And we had an arc light come in, actually more than one. I think we had 3 or 4 sorties come in right around the end of November. And that big complex I was telling you about here, that was the target. And I don't know what kind of damage we did to it. But once the arc lights came in, the pressure kind of released.
Was that the same place that Eddie had to deal with later?
I'm sorry, what?
Was that the same base camp that Eddie dealt with a year
Yeah.
later?
Yeah. When we first found that place, we followed commo wire that looked like a set of cables that was 6 inches across. Anyway, we followed that right into the complex. And at that time, the complex was not occupied. But it was all brand new. I mean, all fresh digging. There were several hundred different positions. And when we pulled out of there, we ran into the NVA, probably a click later, and we had a running gunfight with them until dark. We had some medevacs we had to go through, and then we ended up spending the night in an old NVA position very close to the plantation headquarters. And the next morning, it was Ola Mize's sometimes I just lose it. But the Mike force that came in and relieved us. And they went out there and found all kinds of folks still there.
So that would
have been early December.
okay.
Might have been late November, but it was in that time frame of 69.
Mhm.
And then 70, the only thing that I recall happening in 70 was our CIDG and the Arvin people down at Boduck, the district headquarters, they got in a big fight. And it was about that time, that must have been in February or February, March of 70. And I left about that time and went down to B-34 as the ops officer.
In January of 70, there's a report about an operation by the Mike Force called Operation Striker. It was a multi-battalion reconnaissance force in the vicinity of Budap during the period 7 November to 14 January.
That's reasonable.
That sounds like what you were talking about.
Yes, sir.
It's a fairly extensive report. It's pretty interesting.
I need to buy your book to get a copy of it.
Probably. I'll tell you what. All right, click on the. If you got the buttons down there at the bottom of the screen, can you got one button that says chat? Can you find the button that says chat? Rip,
Yes, sir, I'm here.
did you find the button that says chat?
Do I find the button?
Yeah, down the bottom of your screen.
No.
No. You see something with 3 dots on it on the bottom of your screen.
Are they black?
In the black area, the 3 dots are in white. Anyway, if any of you click on the chat button, you can download that file. I've set it up into the chat section.
Are you saying chat? Like
Chat,
CHAT?
C-H-A-T. Yes.
I got that.
When I click on it, you should see a file called striker.pdf. And you can take that and download it to your computer. Okay, that applies to all of you under the chat. Charlie, welcome.
Hey, Steve. How are
Well,
you?
We've survived this far,
Good.
but we've gone through all of the faces that are up here telling their stories. So you're coming right on and getting into the spotlight right away.
Well, great. I don't have a story to tell.
When did you get there?
And boot up,
Right.
early October, mid-October, 1969.
That's what we're talking about right now. Rip Van Winkle was there.
Yes, he was new, absolutely brand new.
And we're talking. If you click on the chat button underneath, well, you're on an Apple product. I don't know what you can do with that. But I just uploaded the Mike Force report on that operation they were running at that time in your AO.
Okay.
And if you click on the chat button, if you find it, you can download that report to your own machine.
Yeah, the only thing I see on there is you.
Okay, well, that's kind of limited.
Let's see what happens. Yeah, chat.
Okay, now you were medic there,
Yes.
and you were there until about May. So actually, you and Rip pretty well shared your time.
I was there. Yeah, but I left on. I deroast on the 21st of April, so they took me out a month early.
Okay. Rip, keep things going, Rip. Hello. Right. Let me try that. Hold on. Hello, back again. Try to speak there. Okay, hold on. I muted Rip instead of me. All right. Kirk couldn't get his speaker working, and he's on my phone here. Let's see if you can hear him.
Steve, can you hear me?
I can, but you got an echo.
Yeah, everybody else can hear you. I have to sort of mute everybody.
I can hear him.
I will temporarily mute everybody while you talk. And you all are going to have to unmute yourself when it stops.
Can you?
Go.
Sure.
Kirk, go ahead.
I was there about late November of '66. We came from Zomcat. The UDOP had been hit pretty hard, and we were sent in to take over the camp. My story is Captain Garrett got some aerial photographs of a deserted camp about 40 clicks northwest of us, and he decided that we'd go out and take that airfield over, which contained all kinds of supplies for the MBA. And so we set out and got out about 7 or 8 clicks to the northwest and ran into a large path, unpaved but well used, and there was a coaxial cable across from the path, and we went to examine it. It was a couple of inches in diameter. I've never seen anything like it. And
Hello.
Jim?
we started to get enveloped and knew it, and we started to run, and we had about 250 Cambodians with us, and they finally caught up with us, and we were under attack. They were NVA regulars. They had red scarves on. I do remember that. And they were coming off a hill at us, and we were pretty well had. And we got into a hell of a firefight, and a gunship came out of nowhere. I didn't even hear it. We were so involved, and the NVA all started running up the hill and away from us, and that was it. We were on our way back to camp. But anytime we went out to the northwest, we never again got to that trail, and we could make contact every time we went out. So we were busy the rest of the time there.
And this was 66?
This I came in late November of '66 and was there till about April of '67.
All right, Jim Grimshaw joined us here. He was there just before that time.
That's right.
He was in that battle.
So Jim, you want to comment on it?
Well, I left there I was there from March of '66 to end of September '66. So what one were referring? I caught the tail end of it, so I'm sorry.
Apparently you went out to an airstrip. What was the old airstrip at Ghia Map or Ghia? Kirk?
I don't remember the name, but as I remember the distance, it was about 40 clicks to the northwest.
To the northwest?
Northwest.
Okay. I'm not placing anything, about 40 clicks to get you to the border, over the border.
That puts you in Cambodia. If 6 clicks, it puts you in Cambodia.
That maybe is too far. Anyway, we never even came close to making the distance. Only saw the camp on an aerial photo.
But you're saying it was November, and Jim is.
Oh no! I came late November to Budak.
Of 60 what, 5?
66.
Well,
And this was I can't really remember the dates, but I'd say February of '67.
okay. Well, Grimshaw is already gone by that point. And
Yeah, I was just finishing up my tour. As a matter of fact, I was up in the Trang at the McAfee Condo School at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Garrett, in February of '67, was awarded DSC. Was that in connection to this operation?
Garrett?
Right.
Yes, I was with him. he was unbelievable.
Was this the operation you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, that was February 3rd of 67.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. That sounds about right, Steve. Yeah.
All right, let me get everybody else to unmute yourselves over there so you all come back on. I'm going to take the phone off the talk so there's no echo here. All right, everybody unmute yourself. Okay. All right, Jim, why don't you tell us about the earlier time when you were there?
Well, I got there the early part of March of 66. And of course, that was several months, 9 months after the camp being overrun of 65. And and Lynn Steele, who may not be on this right now, but Lynn was he was a demo sergeant engineer guy, but we were still in a very much a rebuilding stage from what was left over in 1965. I don't think 5th Group at that point in time had really decided whether or not they were going to keep Boot Up, after its devastation. But at that time, we had approximately 400 CIDG. One company was Commercerai, the Cambodians. Then we had, I think, 2 companies of Montagnards, and I think we had 1 company of lowland South Vietnamese. I think that's the way it broke out. And I'm going to guess it was about 400 people altogether. We had the famous estimate of approximately 10% of CIDG were either VC sympathizers or out and out VC. When I first got there, Captain Tien, who had helped save Boot Up, he was a Chinese Nung, and he finally, the LLDB finally promoted him to major, and he left a couple months after I got there. He went to all the way down to Benoit. That was his reward. Things were kind of quiet. The first 3 months that I was there, we had very little contact of any sort. I was probably the only guy there at the time without the CIB. I was the XO, the first lieutenant, and so a few times I went out on operations. I certainly didn't like the way that the CIDG did things. I was reminded that I was not at the Fort Benning Ranger School. I was with CIDG in Vietnam, and I reminded people that people get killed that way. And I gave the CIDG and their leaders their due respect, but at the same time, I didn't like the idea where we lay in a perimeter at night and people all that hacking and coughing and wheezing and snorting and sleeping. So I survived all that. And May 26th of 1966, we conducted a heliborne operation. That was the first heliborne operation we had conducted in the brief time I've been there, and that was the day that I flew over the LZ, what was planned to be the LZ the night a village complex south of the Song Bay River was really much out of her more towards Song Bay than it was really in our immediate AO, and I flew over there with a fact that the day before we lined up everything. We had helicopters coming in the next morning. We took off, and when we landed overnight, they had brought in a 12.7 millimeter heavy machine gun, and I ended up getting wounded by grenade fragments. Lynn Steele helped save our operation. he took a group down on the right flank, and he warded off the threat there. It was a mess, and it was a Sunday, so nothing else was going on in Third Corps, I guess, and we were the only game in town. I remember Colonel Durst, who was C-Team commander, came down there. He flew in with his S3 and staff late in the afternoon and wanted to know if we could stay overnight and do our thing. And I said, well, these guys pretty much expended all their ammunition, and we don't have much food and don't have much water. And I'd recommend we go back to camp. And I felt sorry for him in a way, because if he'd been an infantry battalion commander, he would have had better access to helicopters and gunships, and we probably could have stayed. But I had convinced Lieutenant Howe, who was the LLDB commander, that it was probably best that we go back to camp. And we did. We got back to camp by darkness. We did other heliborne operations, but it never was the same. It was a period of time when I think that the NVA were quite satisfied with how they could avoid us. We didn't have major operations. We had some contacts. We had problems with the CIDG. They didn't fire maneuver. There was one other time I found myself with one of my weapons sergeants out there in a contact with a VC, and it turned out the only people firing and maneuvering were me and him. And the CIDG were laying down behind us and not participating very much at all. When Colonel Kelly came around, there was before he came, the 5th group, somebody up in the S4 to 5th group decided we should feed the troops bulgur wheat and take away so many grams of rice per man per day for the CIDG. Well, when that bulgur wheat was a bad idea, Lieutenant Howe wasn't going along with it. By that time, we had Captain Cox as the team leader. Phil Stanage had gone. The thing with the bulgur wheat was Lieutenant Howe was not going to have any part of it. The rice reduction caused a rebellion. The night before, Colonel Kelly and General Kwan were coming into the camp in about mid-August, I think. And so the night before they were coming to camp, the CIDG laid down their arms and did not pull guard duty or do anything. So we went through a whole evening where people were throwing rocks at the team house and hang on for just a moment. I'll just click this off. We'll just let it ring. But anyway, the whole deal was that we eventually got the rice restored. Kelly came in and in the morning, and he addressed all the troops and said, we're going to give you a bonus. We're going to add more rice to your, he reversed the whole thing. And the team sergeant and I, by that time, we pretty much, Bill Kindle and I, we had pretty much decided we probably might want to pack our rucksacks. We thought we'd be relieved, quite frankly. And because we overrode Captain Cox on a couple of things. Well, during the briefing, Captain Cox tried to snow Colonel Kelly with a bunch of figures and give him a Pentagon-style briefing. Colonel Kelly gave up with him, told him, young Cox, I don't want you to snow me with figures. And he turned to me and he pressed me and he said, tell me what's going on in this camp. And I told him. When Colonel Kelly decided he was going to make a tour of the camp, he grabbed me. He goes, Lieutenant Grimshaw, I want you to take me for a tour in the camp. And my team leader said, I'll be glad to show you, sir. And he said, no, I want the lieutenant to take me. So that became an issue. I took everybody around the camp, escorted Kelly to his helicopter, and he he turned to me as rotors were turning in a very dramatic thing. And he said, I understand you're on the promotion list to captain. And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, when you make captain, you're coming up to work for me. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you be careful here. And I said, yes, sir. And towards the end of my tour there, the Lieutenant Howe went on operation with Captain Cox. My replacement was in place. The LLDB Sergeant Major, whom I caught screwing a CIDG's wife one night when we were on guard duty, he knew I had the goods on him, and he was waiting for a way to get back at me. So we had a little brouhaha in camp where he got drunk and he decided he was going to kill me. And I went out to see what was going on, and I was unarmed, and he went for his pistol, and I reached down and grabbed his hand and I cold cocked him. The new C team commander didn't even bother reading my report. He came up to visit. I got on a helicopter. I went down to the C team, and after 7 months of boot up, the C team commander didn't even say, kiss my ass or goodbye. And years later, I had a chance to discuss that whole thing with then Major General Lutz, Joe Lutz, or as some people called him. Joe had been the acting C team commander, had once been the deputy commander and the operations officer, and he knew, and he remembered me. Okay, so anyway, that was very quickly my time in boot up. That it was a place of intrigue. We had more problems inside the camp than we did with the enemy outside the camp, and I think Lynn Steele could, if he was on air, he might back me up on that. So that's a synopsis of my 7 months in boot up. Months later, referring now back to the operation that was just described before me, I knew Garrett. I ran into him in the officer club at 5th Group, and he told me that Lieutenant Howe, or then Captain Howe, Daiwi Howe, had gotten killed in that operation, I think, that you're talking about. He also said that, we'd had this problem. You refer back to my little war story about May 22nd. We knew, obviously somebody in our camp knew something was going on in our operations. So when the NVA or VC wanted to, they played with us. When they didn't feel like playing, they avoided us when we were out on operations. But it turned out that Sam Ung Fali, our chief interpreter and food contractor, was a double agent. And according to Garrett, not to me, but according to Garrett, they found out about him, and of course he was disposed of. I don't know how that all went down. I wasn't there. But that was the guy that was responsible for leaking the information. I love these scam likely callers. You guys get those? Scam likely? I think scam likely has become my best friend in the last week or so.
Weak hell.
But anyway, that was my time at boot up, and I was very, I was very 7 months, and it was one leadership problem after another, to include Captain Cox. And years later, Captain Cox and I, we crossed paths again, made our amends, and before John Cox died, I guess we could say that we became friends, thanks to emails and what have you. He was really a decent guy, but here's one of the problems that was with the officer corps in 5th Group, in my opinion. One night on guard duty, my captain says to me,
Mike Ross, yeah, or one other.
My captain says to me, John Cox caught me on guard duty and said, Jim, I understand if a captain gets a silver star over here, he gets promoted to major. And I said, well, sir, I write the awards for the detachment. And I said, I don't think that's really true, but but it's a good rumor. And he kept pressing me and pressing me. And, and finally I said, he told me, he says, I've been relieved of an infantry company. I've been relieved of a basic training company. So I volunteered to go to special forces so I could resurrect my career. He was a 1958 graduate of West Point. And so there he was. He graduates from SFOC at Fort Bragg. He goes to a pre-mission training course. He's a senior captain, so he lands in 5th group. And because he's a senior captain, he gets an A-team. Yeah, what can I say? I know when I was a lieutenant and I was on the captain's list, some of the guys came to me and said, well, don't you think you'll get this A-team? And I said, there's too many senior captains running around country who need command time. So you had those kind of external issues going on as well. But internally, boot up, as I described, trying to write my autobiography about all this, I went from 7 months in hell, living in hell in an outpost of oblivion, to paradise in the Triangle in my last 5 months at the McVie Recondo School. And I helped build, I was one of the original cadre members of the McVie Recondo School. I don't know what everybody else's experiences had. It sounds like, we've had it's 50 shades of gray. It depends what time of the war you were there, what time of year, and who was in charge. I think that might best describe it. Anybody else got some hard over opinions, harder than mine? Let me know.
I wish my memory was as astute as yours.
Well, I've been working on these stories now for a long time. When I first retired, I was so embittered with the Army that I had already written a lot of these things down. Okay, so I've held them over the years, and also as I've learned over the years that my memory isn't that great. I've had people come up and tell me things that I long since forgotten, and from both tours, my tour, the Special Forces, and then my tour as an infantry company commander later on. I don't know if you guys know it or not, but I later on went to the 7th group many years later, about 10 years later. But I also worked in the Joint Casualty Resolution Center at the POWMIA organization in Thailand, and I was the field element commander there for a while. In '75 when when Cambodia fell and when Vietnam fell, and I ended up being the commander of not only the field element, which was the POWMIA search teams. We didn't do any searching, but it was all the Army guys were all Special Forces qualified. We weren't a Special Forces unit but the 46th Company was gone by then. And a lot of these guys were 46th Company veterans, but we were all Special Forces qualified. But in '75, when I got command of this, when I was a major, I was the commander of the Cambodian and Vietnamese refugee camp. And to put a little tab to that story, when the Vietnamese refugees started coming in, I grabbed the leaders from both the Cambodians and the Vietnamese, and I said, okay, Cambodians, the State Department was afraid the two cultures were going to clash. Historically, they didn't get along. So I lined up the leaders, and I lined up all of the refugees, like two rifle companies out there. And I stood on a podium and I said, Cambodians, you're A company. Vietnamese, you're B company. And I'm the battalion commander. And if you want to go to the United States, you better listen up and what my NCOs have to tell you. And they were pretty good about it. So standing in the back of the formation of the Vietnamese was this tall guy, tall Vietnamese kid. And I'm walking around talking to people. The guy says to me, "Excuse me, Major, were you a lieutenant at Boot Up in 1966? And I said, as a matter of fact, I was. How'd you know that? And he said, well, you remember that time when the CIDG put their kids through a basic training for CIDG in the camp? And I said, yes, it was brutal. They had you going around camp, the inner perimeter on your hands and knees on a hot day, and they were beating you and all kinds of stuff. And I said, I remember it was. He says, well, I was one of those kids. He says, I remember you as a lieutenant. And he said he remembered the sergeant major trying to pull a weapon on me, and he became an interpreter. Then his English got real good. He went to the Mike Force, became an interpreter for the Mike Force, and he got a Airborne Wings tattoo. It said Mike Force on his arm, and I looked at his arm, and he showed me the tattoo. I said, yeah, I can see why you're a refugee and you're running real hard from the NVA. And he said, oh yes, sir. And he was so good that my NCOs put him up in the admin tent and used him to help process refugees because his English was so good.
What was his name?
I can't remember his name. That was in 1975. He like I said, I think when he was like 18 years old, he went to the Mike Force or something like that. I guess I could get it for you if I went back into JCRC records, but because they back in those files in the archives, I know they have a list of every refugee that came out of camp. I was a commander. I was in JCRC for 13 months, and I was on the team for about about 7 months, and I was on the staff at first. And Sully Fontaine was the field element commander, and then he retired, and I took it. Well, another war story, but it's time to let somebody else speak. but I did work for him, and then he left, and he basically retired. I took over the team. It was an interesting time in Thailand. I can say that. In fact, that particular assignment, to wrap it up, was probably as challenging in its own way as it was in any other leadership position that I'd ever been in, to include my time at Boot Up. I yield the floor.
Was
Thank
Bob Kingston in command then?
I'm
at
sorry,
JCR? Was Bob Kingston in command at JCRC at that time?
Bob who?
Kingston.
Kingston, no. Kingston was the original commander, as you know, and then Joe Ulatowski took over, and I came in August of '74, and I think Ulatowski left in like December or January, December '74 or early January '75. When I went back to Fort Bragg, I went to the 7th Group after JCRC, and Kingston was in command at JFK Center at the time. And a little story there, when I became the XO of the 1st Battalion 7th, and I got a Joint Service Commendation Medal. And I said to my S1, I said, well, how about going back to G1? And so I wouldn't mind, the monthly formation for awards and decorations. I wouldn't mind having General Kingston pin it on me. And the word came back from G1, JFK Center said, General Kingston only pins on meritorious service medals and above. And I said, well, how about telling him this medal is for being the commander of the field element on JCRC? Came back, said, General Kingston will be pleased to have you stand in the formation. So I have a photo of Kingston pinning the medal on me, but I got to know Kingston later on after just before he retired. I was in SINCPAC Special Ops, my terminal leave, and we were running conferences, and then we got Kingston to be a guest speaker when he was a CENTCOM commander. And then I got to know him later because I knew so many guys up in the SF chapter 11 at the time, Charlie Norton and Jim Hankey and guys like that I served with over time, that I used to go up there for their functions, but I no longer do that. I go to the functions in Georgia as best I can. Barbed Wire Bob. A quick story. Sully Fontaine and I did not get along. He thought that I sabotaged his deal about being a commander. To make a long story very short, I replaced him as the field element commander. It was a lot of issues between the JCRC commander and Fontaine and so forth. But I ended up being the commander, and Fontaine magically got transferred overnight TDY to Guam. And he only had a couple months to go before he retired out of Thailand. So the JCRC commander shipped him off to Guam because Sully was creating problems for us. And Sully would call back because he said, the JCRC commander said he was still the commander and I was only the acting commander. And I would give orders in the morning to the NCOs, and Sully would call back in the afternoon at night and countermand those orders. And I finally, after about a week of that, I went back to JCRC commander and I said, who's in charge? And I had a Marine Corps, the J3, Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Ward, very, very wise in soul. He ran interference for me, you know. he looked at Colonel Vollmer. He goes, one soldier, one bunk, sir. And so Vollmer apologized to me. He called Sully and he said, you're no longer the commander. Major Grimshaw is. Well, you fast forward, I'm at Fort Bragg and I'm at a Gabriel demonstration, and I'm there to see how the 7th Group guys are doing their little thing for Charlie Beckwith. And Beckwith, whom I worked for in the Florida Ranger camp, comes over to me. He goes, stuck out his hand, because he's a full colonel by now. And I went, how you doing, sir? And he stuck out his hand. He goes, I got 2 words for you, stud. And I said, what's that, sir? He goes, Sully Fontaine. And I said, really? He says, did you know that Sully called General Bob and told him not to take you back in Special Forces? And I did not know that. And he says, I told General Bob that Sully is full of shit. And he says, and I got the story. He says, I know the story and how you became commander. I went, yes, sir. And so about a year later, I get a call from Beckwith, and he goes, what are you doing now, stud? And I didn't work for Beckwith. I'm now the Group S3, 7th Group. And he says, Sully Fontaine is here at Fort Bragg visiting General Bob. We're going to meet at Stillwell Lounge, and you and Sully are going to shake hands and have a beer and bury the hatchet right in front of General Kingston. I said, I'm all for it. I went over there, and Sully kind of hemmed and hawed, and he got to his accent, his French accent a little bit, and he apologized to me in front of Kingston, and we had a beer on it, and I thought that was that. But years later, when he went out to Las Vegas, I have from very good sources that every time my name come up, he bad my ass something fierce. So it's I guess to sum it up to my time in Special Forces, you know. and I'm sure you guys must have a lot of similar stories. But boot op started it all. Let's put it that way.
So, fast forwarding to 68, 69, we had some similar circumstances, as Mike Parks can attest to. we had a guy named Sylvester that came in that became the camp commander. That was a total asshole. We had no time for him whatsoever.
Yeah.
And he was continually looking to try and get in a Valor Award for whatever damn reason. But the other interesting thing that happened was we had a Viet Cong defector, a little gal that spilled her guts out. And so we mounted a bunch of operations. And one of the things she told us was that you have a mole inside working for the Americans. And long story short, it turned out to be one of our cooks.
Yeah.
That was nicknamed Ghia Map because she was kind of a chubby gal. So interesting that we had some parallels. The parallel we didn't have was we had one hell of a LLDB commander, Dai Wei True, that really was a first-class soldier.
Yeah. Yeah, the our cook, our main cook had been there in 65, and it was suspected that she was at least a sympathizer. Now, and when I came aboard, my team sergeant, Harry Golden, and Captain Stanage briefed me and said, we don't talk operations in front of the cook. And for a long time, we thought maybe she was the one. We never could figure out that it was because he was a guy who had been the interpreter, and then he became chief interpreter and what have you. And we never could figure it out. But I will say this: at the time, another problem we had at Boot Up was that because of the camp being over on 65, whatever intel net they had, they lost. And then they brought in an intel NCO that did not do his job. And I was told that right up front. And he never did do his job. And we were way behind the power curve there. We got a guy in, he left not long after I was there. And we got a guy in, but it was like, I mean, you guys in the intel business, you know it better than I do. And to establish a net, of course, takes a hell of a long time and a lot of resources. And to maintain one, of course, is another matter. But we just didn't have it. And that was one of the biggest problems that we had. And also we had attempts on some of our NCOs' lives. I mean, it was not a like I said, it was right out of one of these steamy novels about the Far East. It was almost like I hate to say it, but almost like Apocalypse Now, in some ways. And by the way,
No.
My second career is in the movie business, so I'm a little prejudiced there. I did go to, before I retired from the Army, I saw Apocalypse Now. And I remember I was TDY to Korea out of SINCPAC at the time. And I went to see it with a Navy SEAL buddy of mine or something. And I saw the movie and I thought, well, there's a lot of exaggeration here, but it's a movie, okay? You understand the movie business, and it's designed to entertain. And anyway, but it's surreal, and the surrealness is what I identified with based on my own experiences at Boot Up. Some of you guys might not like that movie, but that's, I understand it. Some guys, we're hard fast over the different scenes and so forth, but kind of a, it just a lot of things there reminded me of Boot Up, quite frankly.
Hello.
Go ahead, Mike.
To get back to Boot Up, what Brother Ishimoto mentioned, when they caught the cook, her name was Ghia Map. They came in and they polygraphed almost everybody that was working for us, and they uncovered several other people that were feeding information, including the camp carpenter who was one of our most trusted people.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out that they were, you know, some of the VC were coming into camp and putting some really hard pressure on those people at night. And I think they murdered a couple of people during that time to emphasize it. So they got rid of Cole Mop. She came back later on. I saw her in the village. The carpenter, he was gone for a little while, but came back to the job. I don't know how they resolved the fact that these people were being pressured, but like I said, they came in and they polygraphed almost everybody that had any close contact, and they discovered several people that were under the influence and were passing some kind of intel on at that time.
Yeah, I think the category of people that were under pressure to do things is sort of an underlooked aspect of the war. One person who was a very high-ranking officer was the commander of special forces for a short period of time. My mind is going a little blank, but he was the guy who basically left Pleiku to its own at the end of the war. And
Good. How about you?
I really think
All right, man, thanks.
I need this game.
Appreciate it.
that he was not at all sympathetic, but he was under severe pressure. As Phu Van Pham, he committed suicide when Saigon fell, but he seemed to be at every juncture in his career at an important point where he made the wrong decision, and he was considered to be a great officer, but he had been captured at Dien Bien Phu and not treated all that well as a junior officer in the French National Army. So he was the province chief at Chao Dup during the Tet Offensive. Chao Dup was virtually overrun, and Drew Dix had to save the city. He was followed in that job, which turned into the 44th Special Tactical Zone, by another fellow whose name escapes me temporarily, but that this guy who followed him and probably paid money to get that job. When Saigon fell, he was the guy who went to the radio station to make the announcement for everybody to surrender. And then he went to his apartment and changed into his North Vietnamese Army uniform. So Phu Van Pham then went to Special Forces, and there was a little rumor in one of the author's books about strange things about Vietnam, was that one of the generals, one of the commanders of Special Forces was a Communist agent. I never got those people to verify or tell me where the information came from or who it was, but they were pointing at the wrong guy. They should have been pointing at Phu Van Pham, and he wasn't an agent. Then he was involved in the Operation Lam Sam 719, and he probably was one of the people most responsible for the thing just screwing up. Although he was credited for the great work that he did. And finally, as the senior 2 Corps commander in 1975, he ordered the evacuation of Pleiku and just disappeared. Didn't take charge of it anything. It was turned into be a rout. He killed himself, which is somewhat commendable under the circumstances. But I do think that the agents of the people who were operating under pressure are sort of underlooked when we talk about communist agents.
Right.
Jim, one footnote to your comments. Chester Garrett, when he went home, I think it was in 1977, he ended up getting killed by his wife and stepson or son.
Right. Yeah. I knew him when he was an E5 in the 82nd Airborne Division. I was a PFC. I remember him. And then, of course, I met him again I remember because he told me about that big operation and where Captain Howe, they got killed. And I mean, I was absolutely shocked by it because I thought that Howe was he was hard to get along with, and his arrogance increased when he made captain. But you know, he at least, I think, tried to do the right thing. And but then again, what was the right thing? What we look at to say what the right thing in our time was, well, how many people, how many enemy KIA and WIA, and how successful are we here, and do we this, do we do that? What was the right thing for the LLDB? I don't know. I mean, I imagine they had shared some of the same goals, but I'm not so sure. I don't know. Steve, you're a better historian about the whole thing than I am. I got a question for you. Whatever happened to General Kwan? Do you know?
No, I don't. But I think they ended up here in the States,
Okay, all right.
but I didn't get the end. Mike, I think you mentioned a LLDB named Chu, CHU. Did you mention him as the LLDB commander at the camp?
True, TRIEW, I believe.
IEU, yeah. Okay, then that's the wrong guy because I didn't think that the Q got there. He was up in I-Corps. But Rip, whatever happened?
Hey, Steve, this is Eddie. I got to sign off.
Understood.
Okay.
Glad you were able to make
Great
it.
talking to y'all. Great talking to y'all.
Thank you. Good talking with you.
You bet. My pleasure.
Rip, you left your friend there sitting on a basket with a boa constrictor inside of it. Whatever happened to that when he got to the camp? Was it dinner or did it become a pet?
Oh, he became a pet. We had a menagerie there at Boudop. We had what they called a honey bear. And when he was a cub, they captured him. When he was a cub, they'd killed his mama. And he would crawl up the radio tower, the radio antenna there at the team house. And about the only one to get him down was me. And you can imagine me having to crawl up that damn antenna, get this bear and bring him down. And then we had a monkey that would do just about the same thing. They sure did like that radio antenna. But we had a caiman and a boa constrictor, and then all kinds of parrots and stuff like that. Go ahead.
That Renteria and myself caught that bear on an operation. It was just a little tiny, weighed a couple of pounds.
Yeah.
And we kept it for a while. And if you remember the XO we had at the time, took it down to Benoit. I was going to trade it for a load of chow. And they kept it in a cage down there. We never got the chow. And that bear's stuffed dead body is presently in the museum at Fort Bragg.
You're kidding.
Now,
Really?
the weird stuff you remember when you got real stuff you can't remember,
Well, that opens up a good moment for me to bring up the fact of the advertisement. If you haven't got the Green Beret magazines, you should have them. One of the reasons you should have them is that I indexed the hell out of all 52 volumes. And if you look through it here, I believe there's an article here about that bear. So I will look for it. You go ahead and continue the conversation on something else while I see what I can find here.
Well, I was still there at Boudop when we sent the bear down to Benoit.
I remember you really well. We were one of the good guys.
I had
Yeah.
I had a chance to go through Benoit on my way out of country. And that poor bear was stuck inside a cage. Hell, he had never been in a cage.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that at one point, he was like a son to John Anderson. And the bear clawed at Andy one time, and we were afraid that rabies. So Andy had to undergo a series of goddamn rabies shots. But then Louis Brown was a Charlie Company Sergeant Major, and he's the one that promised us a month worth of chow when we were under siege for the beer, along with a .38 revolver, which was promised to me that I've never goddamn seen, and Mike and the other and Rip never saw the goddamn chow.
Yeah, nothing.
Well, I had a staff sergeant, a civil affairs NCO, Staff Sergeant Frank Midlall, Midlal. He later on retired in Hawaii. He retired as a sergeant major, and he was from Czechoslovakia. And he was not your postcard, picture postcard recruiting poster, if you will, of a lean and mean special forces soldier. He was a pretty thick boned guy, and he had a kind of a gut on him. But man, it was hard as nails, And I said to him one time, I said, Frank, we don't eat very well up here, and so I got the captain to go along with the idea that we would send Frank down with the traditional crossbows and so forth, and send him down to Benoit to the mess halls, the Army mess halls. And Frank did a great job, but I said, Frank, you got to come back and walk one operation per month. All right. He said, no problem, sir. And so Frank came back one day, and he went out in operation, and he was the only guy to go out in the operation with the Cambos, and the only American. So Frank came back, and he debriefed us and said, yeah, he says, I went over to Cambodia there to that lake, and he says, they stayed gone for a while. And Frank came back, and he said he went in the shower to get all cleaned up. In the meantime, helicopter lands, and a Marine Corps Brigadier General gets off, and an Army Major General, and I'm sure now the name slips me when I'll tell the story. He had been 101st Airborne Division commander. And anyway, he was noted for his outgoing personality. But anyway, the two generals come in, and they want to brief it. So here I am. I'm the only officer in camp at the time, and I come up with this brilliant idea. And Frank comes out of the shower, and he's got his towel around his big belly, and he's in his shower shoes. He's got his toilet bag, And I said, well, here's Staff Sergeant Midlal. He just came back from the operation with our Cambodian company. And I said, he can debrief you, And so Frank goes over to the map, and he goes, well, sir, we're over in Cambodia. And the general looks at him and says, Sergeant, are you aware of the State Department policy? We don't operate in Cambodia. He goes, well, sir, what would you want me to do? He says, I am the only American under operation. They want to go fishing in Cambodia. He says, would you stay in the Vietnam jungle by yourself, or you go to Cambodia with the Cambodian company? And the Army Major General took his helmet off. He sat down at the poker table. He goes, you're goddamn right, Sergeant. You did the right thing. But I don't know about some of you guys of your time there. I got a little tired of eating indigenous rations, and I got tired of the Vietnamese cooks that we had and what have you. And so Frank went, and one day 3 caribous in line come up waiting to land at the Boot Up airstrip, and out of that all this food, and Frank had just scrounged all this stuff. So I went back in the kitchen, and And I said to everybody, I said, well, I said, I'll fix my favorite foods, spaghetti and meatballs, whatever, you know, and I improvised and, you know, I guess it was okay. We didn't die from it, but, you know, and it was like, then one other guy said, well, sir, you know, maybe I'll try this recipe. Next thing you know, we had 2 or 3 guys back there messing around. And so I'm not saying the cooking got any better, but we got a little bit of diversity, if you want to use that word these days. And it got to be, you know, it sort of eased the pain a little bit. But the big thing was we had access to American food. That was, and we weren't paying for it out of our per diem. And the first time that the first month that when the team's leader said to me, you know, okay, XO, how much do we owe for our food? And I said, nothing, sir. And he couldn't believe it. And he said, you know, how about tell me about it? I said, you don't want to know. And so he kind of said, we let that go. He says, how much is the bar bill? And I said, nothing, sir. And he says, I don't want to know that either. I said, no, sir. And old Frank Frank just winked at me because Frank could go down to Benoit. He could go in there and he could BS his way into all kinds of stuff. And he brought back all, I mean, it was, Frank made life very, very nice for us there. But, you know, it at times was a long, hard.
Sauce.
Oh, we got a little something going on there. But the other thing that the night of the Rice Rebellion, I want to point out, we were all hunkered down. We had our weapons or gear ready to go, and the team leader was, you know, he was, you know, what do I tell the B team? And I said, you tell them with the truth what our problem is. And he goes, I can't tell them that. Colonel Kelly's coming in the morning, you know, you think we're not doing our job. And I said, we won't be here in the morning if we don't tell them what the hell's going on. And so as we're sitting there in the dark, if you guys remember the old team house, and then there was a supply room right next to it of sorts. And it was a very narrow gap between the 2 buildings. Well, all of a sudden we heard something out there. Well, apparently one of the Cambodians came in, they wrote on a piece of cardboard and it said, when the firing starts, loosely translated, when the firing starts, you know, come out through the Cambodians, and the Cambos were going to lead us out of camp, lead the Americans out of camp. We noted that the translation was when the firing starts, not if the firing starts. And that caused us much concern that night. Fortunately, nothing else happened except, you know, they throw a rock or a brick at the team house and it roll down and off the tin roof and scare the hell out of you, and throw a grenade outside a little bit. You know, you can't say that the LLDB didn't have some of their henchmen, you know, going at it for it. But it was a very, very tenuous moment when we sat down to brief Colonel Kelly that morning. I had told some of the team members, I said, you know, we need to pack your bags because you're probably going to go. And they didn't, but I laid it out for Colonel Kelly, very raw truth. And it wasn't pretty. It was not, you know, you know, at that point in time, I said, efficiency report be damned, if you will. And sure enough, it was sort of a mediocre efficiency report later on. And they tried to cover for it a little bit for me, but yeah, what can I say? But you know, I mean, certainly, you know, you react to things and you do things the way your mama taught you and so forth, and you just have to go with it. I'm proud of my time at Boot Up. I am. I'm very, very proud of my time because of all the little negative shots there I take. There were so many other good shots of good people, and I'm sorry that Lynn Steele is not on this with us right now, because Lynn Steele was there before me, and he went home as an E5, went back to Bragg, and decided to re-enlist in '86, and he went on to a very distinguished career later on. And he could fill you in, I think, from a former enlisted standpoint about that particular time in Boot Up. So I'm going to jump his case since he's not on here. he and I have remained good friends all this time, obviously.
It's unfortunate there are more people didn't show up, because I sent the emails out probably to about 30 plus people.
Yeah, I saw the list. Yeah,
The people who didn't make it, I think, lost out on a good time here.
Oh, well, I just want to thank you, and you got me. I'm going to send money.
Over here, that picture, there's your bear named Barney.
Wow.
Yeah, it's misidentified in the JFK Museum as coming from a different camp. And Mike and I totally disagree with that.
Wade, you and I ran into each other a long time ago, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through Beckwith.
Yeah, you threw Beckwith. Oh, yeah, that's right. Do you know that he, when I was a 7th Group S3, I got this call from him, and he said, "What are you doing tomorrow, son?" It was another one of those. I said, "What do you want me to do, sir?" And he goes, "Meet me at JFK Center." And this was after Delta got approved, okay? And so I slipped over there. The JFK Center was just me and him in the conference room. And he whipped out the organization chart for Delta. He sat down with me, and he goes to this whole long explanation. And I'm looking at slots for majors. And I know that Bucky Burris has already got the ops job. And I know that Chuck Odorizzi's already got the squadron. And I'm trying to figure out where is the space for me. What am I going to do? Am I going to be, sitting behind a desk somewhere? And he caught me in a brain fart moment, because I had just come back I'd been back at Bragg about a year, and I had it's typical Special Forces horror story here. I just remarried my first wife, the mother of my children. I was concerned about the marriage, concerned about my kids, concerned about my career, all those things. And he briefed me, and he goes, "Well, what do you think, stud?" And I look at him, and he goes, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well, sir," I said, "I just became the 7th Group S3, and I just got married again." Blah, blah, blah. He goes, "All right, stud, thanks very much. Appreciate it." And I was out of there. And, and as I was walking out of there, I was like, "Grimshaw, you dumb shit. He just offered you a job on Delta, and you've turned him down." So, guys, I got to tell you, a lot of guys have nightmares about Vietnam. I can tell you on good authority that a lot of my nightmares, I wake up in the morning saying, why did I do that? Why didn't I come back with a more positive response? And but Charlie and I got along. We got along very well. I like Charlie. I worked for him briefly in the Florida Ranger camp. He was just coming back, from. I tell you, he was one hell of a Florida Ranger camp commander too. So I know a lot of guys don't like Charlie, but I got to say, I really like him.
Well, you were there with Dave Bramlett also.
Dave Bramlett, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Dave went on to be a big time
4-star.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, in '77, Well, 75, I got shanghaied to ROTC duty because I was getting promoted and there were no slots for me in SF.
Yeah.
So I ended up on ROTC. They told me I might as well plan on spending 6 years there and retiring. Less than 2 years later, I get goddamn orders to go to Sergeant Major Academy. I show up there in July 77 and I run into the guy that was to become Delta's first 3 Sergeant Major, Forrest Foreman, who was a friend. And he says, call Beckwith. I said, why? He said, I told you to call Beckwith. I said, okay, Forrest. I called Beckwith. Beckwith answered the phone and he says, are you ready, boy? And I said, for what, sir? You know goddamn what? You're the freaking intel puke. You know what? I had no freaking idea, you know. And I thought about it for a fleeting second and I said to myself, I know one thing about Beckwith. If you want to be where the action is, right, wrong, or indifferent, you hang around Charlie Beckwith.
Oh, yeah.
So I said to him, sir, I got one question for you. He said, what's that? I said, you going to trick fuck me again? He laughed and he said, I guess that means you're coming. I said, yes, sir, I'm coming. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was the start of Delta.
Yeah, like I say, I had a brain for it. It didn't hit me until years later. I was like, and I'd come back from Sturgis on a motorcycle, and me and Chuck Oterizzi and a bunch of SF guys. And anyway, Jim Hankey and Chuck and I were staying at Chuck's house, and I went to sleep in Chuck's den, a big luxurious big den, beautiful house there in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time. And I'm asleep on the couch, and I take this nap, and I wake up, and I look over the wall, and I see this, typical 8x10 frame, black frame things, military certificate. Well, first I see a picture of Lee Mize, okay, hanging on the wall, and next to it, I said, well, it looks like a set of orders. So I go over there and I look, and here's a set of orders. First 3 guys on Delta, Beckwith, Burroughs, and Oterizzi. And I went like, shit, I could have been number 4, and it was just 3 officers. That was it. And I went like, God, I could have been number 4. And see, and the thing about it was that back when Delta was being formed, if Beckwith wanted somebody, all he had to say is, I want so-and-so, and the guy was gone. And Bob Montel, who was 5th Group Commander at the time, and Charlie Norton was my boss, these guys were going nuts because they're losing all their good people. And Charlie especially, he didn't want to, he'd come in and say, sir, we lost another NCO today. We lost Sergeant First Class Franklin today, Oh, Charlie was just, almost throwing things. and I thought to myself, now here's the captain's story. I never told Charlie that I got interviewed I never told Charlie Norton that I got interviewed by Beckwith. I didn't want to. I didn't want to bring any bad news to him. So fast forward to just, a few years ago, before Charlie died, I'm sitting there with Nick Walsh at Charlie Norton's pool party in McLean, Virginia. 11 o'clock at night, we're both staying with Charlie Norton at his house. The 3 of us are all half drunk. And I said, sir, I got something I've been wanting to tell you for umpty years. And he says, what's that? And I said, well, Charlie, I said, I had a chance to go to Delta. I said, but I was your S3 and I stayed loyal to you. Now, you'd think that you probably would get rewarded for your loyalty, right? You think maybe the guy would say to you, geez, Jim, that was very, very good of you to stay loyal to me. Not Charlie Norton. Charlie Norton says, you dumb motherfucker, you could have retired 2 ranks higher if you'd have gone. And I went like, so I was like, oh my God. But life goes on. You gotta you gotta get over those things. But I I remember Beckwith very, very well, and I think anybody who's ever been around him remembers him. It's for whatever.
By
You know,
the way, Kurt Hurst was the first three. Bucky was scheduled for a squadron. Chuck had S&T, selection and training.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were plenty of openings.
It was all in it. It was all
Yeah.
in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was well, I mean, actually I knew Bucky and Chuck very well, and we'd see them out there after work at night in a rucksack before they went off to SAS school. They're walking around JFK Center, all doing a rucksack march and doing that. And
Well, the irony
it was clearly my error. I mean, I fully admit it was clearly a mistake on my part.
Well, the irony was that, Chuck was like a son to Charlie, but then Charlie fired him shortly after we officially started the unit for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing was, getting fired by Charlie was a common occurrence for guys like Burris and myself. And we didn't pay any attention to him when he fired us. Chuck did and left.
Yeah, well, Charlie fired me one time too, so I know the feeling. That's why I was shocked when he brought me over there. But I talked to a couple other guys that turned me down too. From the Florida Ranger camp days, that said no. Just they'd worked for him once and they didn't want to work for him again. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, well. Now that we've done Charlie Beckwith stories, who's up next?
Well, go back to Budap, and what Rip was talking about was the two monkeys we had there were Clyde and Dip.
Yeah.
And both of them died during that siege because they were starving in HC4 and passed away. And we had a dog that we nicknamed George for George Odom, who nobody had any goddamn respect for as a group sergeant major. Always with his sleeves down, and under his sleeves, all these Seiko watches that he was trying to sell to anybody coming into 5th Group. But the joke with the monkeys was that every damn time we get motored or rocketed, they'd go up this goddamn radio tower and start chirping, and Dip, the oldest monkey, would point in a certain direction. And at one point, the Army decided they were going to try and bring a counter-motor radar prototype out to Budap, which they did.
Yeah.
And they built us this tremendous tower to house the damn thing in. And the radar didn't work with a shit. So the joke we had, Mike, you can chime in on this, was that when Clyde would climb the goddamn radio tower and point, he'd be more accurate and, 5 minutes faster than that freaking radar ever was.
I remember the dog George defected to the first Cav when they were there for a while because they were feeding him so well. And then they finally backed over him with a deuce and a half.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Let
Well,
me,
one of the things that when I was talking to Colonel Kelly that one time about, the question was, what can we do to make Budap a better camp? And I said, maybe you get an American unit up here and just hang around for a while and conduct some operations and, see what's going on with, maybe truly see what's going on with the enemy and this and that and so forth. And I never thought for a moment that anything like that would ever occur, but at least in the great wisdom of being a first lieutenant at the time and having been around there for a few days, I thought, wouldn't it be neat to do this? And Kelly was, he didn't say one way or the other, But when I approached that with other people, they looked at me like I was crazy. And then all of a sudden, months go by, and all of a sudden you start seeing just exactly, that happened. Not that I was a purveyor of the future or anything like that, but it just, all I'm saying there is it was very clear that by September of '66, that boot up needed some kind of assistance, some way to get it off of ground zero. And I mean, that ran from everything from enough cement to make your bricks and to build a brick wall, enough money to do major reconstruction. When we reconstructed the camp in '66, we used all local labor, went out and cut down a lot of those teak and mahogany trees and redid the bunkers and so forth. That was all local labor and work done by, when I say local, work done by the CIDG. And Lynn, like I said, Lynn Steele could, if he was here, he'd give you a better report on that. But clearly boot up needed something, and it needed, under that title of something, it needed an awful lot of things at that time. And you guys were there after me. You're certainly a testament to all the good things, I think good things that came about as a result. But that was, that was still a hotbed area. It just that they, the enemy knew what we were all about, and they decided, like I said, they decided to play us. They had the information. We thought we did, but we didn't.
Charlie, you're muted.
Yeah, it got overrun again in '67, did it not?
Yes,
And then rebuilt underground,
yes.
because the team house that Mike and I were in was under 4.5 feet underground with sandbags and PSP layered, and then a concrete layer on top of that. And Wade, I don't know whether you and I were there at the same time or not. You're awfully familiar, but Mike has talked about you so much on Facebook over the years that I don't know whether you and I overlapped. I don't know whether we overlapped or not. Lieutenant Fager was the XO when I got there in October of '69, and Captain Van Winkle was the newly installed team leader.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I was, Captain Van Winkle went out on his first operation after I got there, and being the big guy that he is and trying to work his rucksack through the bamboo, he got dehydrated, and they had to bring him back to camp, and I had to run a couple of bottles of IV fluid into him to straighten him out. I'm sorry he left before I told that story, because he was a good guy. I liked him. I liked Lieutenant Fager, and I kind of remember you, Wade. I don't know exactly whether we overlapped there or not.
No,
I have a terrible memory about who was there and who wasn't.
Yeah, I left roughly June of '69, but I came back to the camp a couple times.
That must be it then.
Yeah, but yeah, one of the interesting things happened was, and Mike was here then, but I don't think you were, Charlie. But Daiwei Chu got pissed off one day because almost every time we got motored, it would come from the plantation, the rubber plantation north of us.
Yeah, right.
Which was a
Fuke 10.
Yeah, with a R&R facility. They had an Olympic-sized swimming pool up there. So Chu made up his mind and went up to the plantation and ordered everybody to relocate down to Bodok District. And it was funny seeing all these people coming out with their household belongings. And then he asked the American side to put an airstrike. And so 105s came in and bombed the shit out of that plantation.
Ooh.
And
We were, go ahead.
Yeah. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was after that we finally found the goddamn entrance to their tunnel complex in the plantation owner's fireplace. You recall that, or am I screwed
No,
up?
I don't remember that at all. I remember we would pass through there and it was like a little French village almost, but it
Yeah.
was abandoned. I went in the mansion and looked around a few times. I remember the pool. I don't remember anything about the tunnel complex.
I don't remember that either.
Okay.
I know the owner flew out one time in a private aircraft and landed and looked around.
Yeah, he flew in that, what I used to call a Wiley Post monoplane,
Correct.
and he had this goddamn midget with him that would accompany him.
Yeah, I don't remember the midget. I remember the guy.
Yeah.
When we were under siege in October, November, December of '69, but we were getting 50 rounds a day of something, whether it was 120s
Easily.
or mortars. And
Yeah.
and subsequent to that, a helicopter pilot, I don't remember now whether it was a Huey or a Cobra, but somebody noticed that there was a guy laying on top of the water tower at foot 10, and it was a flat concrete top. And they had marked the circumference of that tower with 360-degree marks, with 360 pointing due north. And that was the guy that was directing their fire. And they blew that up. So they got a little bit less accurate after that.
From the other camps in 3 Corps, the report is that they were really unable to do anything in the plantations, and that the standard fare was, if they did something, they had to pay $200 per rubber tree as compensation.
There
Yeah,
was
well, we
some
blew
kind of
we blew a lot of them up.
But did you pay for them?
Not that I'm aware of, but then I was just the medic. I had nothing to do with administration.
All right, when
I
you,
know that on my second operation with Sergeant Blair, we left camp out the gate and turned left, and I don't know what the distance is between the runway and the rubber. But as soon as we walked into the rubber, there was a whole bunker complex. I mean, they were like 30 yards, 50 yards, 40 yards away from the edge of the airstrip in bunkers. That was where we first made contact with them. That was on November the 6th of '69, I believe.
yeah, I'm putting my cursor over here where I think the area you're talking about.
Yeah.
Here's the camp, the runway, and then the plantation.
And then if you go from the camp to the runway to rubber, it all started right there.
Yeah. And is the swimming pool and the other complex over here?
Yep.
I don't remember the swimming pool. I know that the only time that I ever walked through Foot 10, there was a remnant of a garden, and there was a great big huge cucumber laying there on the vine, and I picked it, and woe unto me, I ate it, and it was so sweet. It tasted almost like watermelon, but it went through me in about 20 minutes, and I had a terrible case of diarrhea from eating that cucumber.
There seems to be a note over here that says football stadium or football area.
Yeah, that would have been soccer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was also a big Buddhist temple right about that same area that you were pointing at. And we would always go by it. We never went into it. And they used to always say that the VC would probably had some kind of an office back in there or something.
Well, during the time I was at boot up, the French overseer would fly up from Saigon, and he was like off limits. You know, we knew his aircraft. We were not allowed to really touch the guy, and he was a Frenchman. And then he had a Vietnamese guy in charge, and I do remember the water tank. I didn't remember the swimming pool, but they had the water tank, and that was at one point in time in the dry season, I guess that was the only good water that there was around. And we had a water issue. The team sergeant and I, Harry Golden, we went over there, see if we could negotiate a little bit, and that didn't go well. We ended up being very frustrated, and so forth. And to Steve's point, At that time, I recall that, yes, there was some sort of payment that you had to make to the, if we ruined a rubber tree. So we had to be very, very careful how we operated around there.
Yeah, here, I made it a little bigger, football ground and water
Yeah,
listed over here.
yeah,
I remember the Frenchman, he had his own plane.
yeah.
I was there 16 months altogether, so I got to see a little bit of broad range of some of those things.
Yeah.
They weren't working the plantation at all while I was there, but there was some sort of taboo about damaging the place. We would pass through it, and there was I think from the action of 67, there was all kinds of like these little cluster bomb units laying all over the place.
Yeah, they were
Other
everywhere.
things. Yeah, you had to be really careful.
Now, when you talk about this guy coming in with his plane, was he landing on your airstrip, or I don't see?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
Yes.
the only airstrip in the area. He had his own plane. I can't remember what it was, but he would land, and I don't even remember if he had to announce himself. I remember a couple of times he came, but I don't remember the details. But I do remember, like Brother Grimshaw says, there wasn't any interaction with him at all. He would come in, and somehow we would get down there and look around. There was no. We passed through that village several times during the time I was there, and it was just like totally abandoned. There was maybe a caretaker, but nobody was living there. And you go up in his mansion, and all the furniture was out of it. And the plantation was becoming overgrown, but it wasn't totally abandoned. But I guess right during the Cambodian incursion, I was gone by then, but apparently the Rome plow people came in and just bulldozed everything, the village, the plantation, everything, and launched a lot of the incursion out of the Budap area, is what I've been told.
It's very strange here. This road listed as 306 or 309. This goes right along the border of the plantation and squared off. That's kind of unusual. I don't see that.
Yeah,
often.
I never noticed that till now.
It was pretty well defined. When we would be out in that area, we'd be in the jungle or the wilderness one minute, and then we would kind of walk in, and when you were in the plantation, it was pretty well, and the trees were, in line and marked off. It had been a big deal at one time, and I guess they were intending to make it a big deal again, and then they bulldozed it. And apparently that's all built up, and it's like there's a fellow that lives in Vietnam now. I don't know, some guys might know him. His name is McCully, and he travels all over the place and takes pictures. And the Budap area and all, they're all built up. It's all urbanized and civilized, and all that stuff is gone. There's no trace of anything.
Well, there's a major golf course in Song Bay.
Yeah.
Sergeant, Master Sergeant Smith, or Smythe, however he pronounced his name,
Yeah.
he and I, on that map that Steve had up, we were in that rubber just before the triple canopy area again, just to the northeast of Budap, when we got involved in a big firefight. And we got pinned down, and we had them pinned down. I don't know who was winning, but we were covered up. And we needed some air support, and we brought in some fast movers, a couple, I don't know what they were, F-105s. I don't know who they belonged to, but they were dropping some heavy stuff. And I mean, really heavy stuff, and danger close too. I had them, we had them putting it danger close. And when they got through dropping all that stuff, and we were laying as flat on the ground as we possibly could, we looked like Johnny Weissmuller after those monkeys covered him up in one of those Tarzan movies with those jungle leaves, because we had a layer of leaves on us that was about 3 inches thick, but we were still there. We never did a bomb assessment. We just left it alone. We don't know whether they killed anybody or not. We were just happy to get out of that situation.
Look, let me give you another advertisement here. My main website, Special Forces Books, specialforcesbooks.com. And you shouldn't make the mistake of abbreviating it. You got to spell it out, Special Forces Books, because otherwise you'll be at a gay bookstore in San Francisco. But I also have another website called specialforcesphotos.com. Both books and photos are plural. The photos website allows you, if you go up there and sign in using your whole name. So don't tell me you're boot up number 72. You say I'm Mike Parks or Charlie Noyes or whatever, because I'm getting so many bots up there. I throw out probably 10 a day if I don't recognize their name. But if I recognize your name, I'll approve you on that website.
Okay.
From that point on, there are albums for every single camp we had in Vietnam, and a couple of others for albums, places we other places. And you can put up pictures by yourself into that website. Because for me to put up pictures, I'd be out spending the rest of my life doing that. And you can put captions on your pictures, and then somebody else who's been approved can come by and say, I'm the third guy from the left. So let me take that while you guys continue the conversation.
Uh-oh. Is that Scam Likely?
You know, during the time Charlie was talking about during the siege in November and December and October of '69, it really got crowded up there. The Mike Force was running around all over the place. They had some of the 11th Armored Cav up there for a while. They came up with a bunch of APCs and even some Sheridans. And the interesting thing is that they flew them in on C-130s, and they flailed around for a month or so. Every time they'd get off the trails, they'd throw a track. They weren't very successful. They lost a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, they loaded up and they flew back. I can't remember if they put 1 or 2 tracks on a plane at a time, but it was really scary to watch those 130s take off and just skim over the village. But what made it interesting, about a month later, we got a copy of Stars and Stripes, and they talked about the 11th Armored Cav had fought their way up to the beleaguered Budap SF camp and had a lot of fights up there, and then fought their way down the highway to Song Bay. And it was a total fallacy. They did it on airplanes. There wasn't any road going anywhere, and it was really interesting to see that. Also, Charlie was talking about the airplanes. We had a lot of B-52 strikes during that period of time, and we had no influence at all on where they went. I think most of their intel came from the SOG guys, who also launched out of Budap every now and then. But we'd be in the field or in camp, and there would be a call come over the radio in the clear. It would permeate everything, and it would say, arc light warning, arc light warning, arc light warning. And they would say an arc light is coming. They would give the exact time, and they would give the exact coordinates of the path in the clear. And if I was in the field, I had to get my map out and mark that path and make sure, ideally, you were supposed to be 5 clicks away from that path. And we had about a 30-minute warning to beat feet away from there, which we were pretty successful doing.
It would be difficult to be 5 clicks away from anything just over the border, because we were only 4 from the border to begin with.
Yeah. And there would be like 3 planes, and then about 30 minutes later, there'd be 3 more. And I remember they dropped from, I think, 35,000 feet, and it was all radar controlled. And if you knew exactly when and where that they were, you could look up, and you could look, and you could look, and you could look, and you might just see the tiniest glint of one of those planes going over. But they were pretty accurate in those paths. But when they however they got onto the radio net, that came in the clear saying arc light warning, and it gave the exact, so anybody listening could have marked that down, Charlie or whoever. They had a 30-minute warning that was coming.
Yeah, we marked them down. We marked they were little overlapping rectangles.
Yeah.
And they just skipjacked across the border just on the other side. And we had them marked on that map. We had them marked on that map behind you in your Radio Shack. And I remember one evening, it was just about dark. We pulled lawn chairs, folding chairs up on top of the team house and sat there and watched the
Yeah.
bombs impact.
Yeah.
And they hit a huge cache of something. I mean, because it went up like nobody's business, and it lit the sky up. And we were certainly glad, because that was stuff that wasn't coming our way the next day.
Well, one of the old guys on the old SF list put up a picture, maybe not of that one, but it was an arc light going on what was supposed to be an NVA tank park across the border. And I remember we had warnings about a tank attack, and they brought the engineers in and built a formal anti-tank minefield around the camp. You know, marked every inch of where every one of those mines went. And that's what took out the C-130 that came through our wire.
It was December the 10th, 1969. That C-130 came through the wire. They landed, that C-130, I remember that red-headed Air Force major that was the pilot of that. I don't know his name. There was only 3 people on board, pilot, co-pilot, and a chief back in the back, an off the kicker or whatever he was. But they landed, they offloaded their stuff. They went up to the other end of the runway and turned around to take off going to the south. And they dropped a mortar right up under his right wing and damaged whichever engine it was on the right side. I don't know, but so he only had 3 engines. And according to regulations, you couldn't take off without a full set of engines, without permission from whoever was in control of the Air Force. Well, this guy wouldn't have any of that, because he was a sitting duck, and he tried to take off. And as soon as he left the ground, the plane shifted to the right toward the camp. And my understanding of the way he told the story after he got into the team house was that he tried to feather one of the engines on the left-hand side to balance his power out, and instead he feathered the only remaining engine on the right side, which spun him into the ground and through the wire and hit all those anti-tank mines. Killed 4 of the Cambodians that were with the Mike Force. I'll never forget that. And when he left there, he left on a litter, because he went through a bottle of Johnny Walker Red like nobody's business.
I remember that. They carried him out on the stretcher.
Yeah, on a litter. He couldn't even walk.
I got up inside. To this day, I have the compass out of that airplane, because I was up there taking, the cockpit was intact, and I was taking some commo gear out of it and stuff that I thought we needed. So I'm up there taking stuff out of it, and I heard someone behind me, and apparently some Air Force people had showed up, and a full colonel was there, and he wanted to know if any of the controls had been moved or if anything had been done to anything. Well, the CIDG had already been up in there going through stuff, and I told him everything probably had been moved, but he was kind of concerned about wanting to know how the controls were, if they, you know, trying to whatever, but I'm sure they had been moved. They weren't in the original position. I'm sure of that.
I've got the little logo out of the pilot steering wheel that says Lockheed C-130. and a couple of those spotlights with the coiled wires that hang, the map lights. I've got 2 of those, and I've got the stick logo out of the pilot's side.
We had a young demo guy. He was just new in country, and he was kind of over enthusiastic, and we were worried about that airplane because we were thinking about getting a ground attack right about that time, and it had taken out a lot of our wires, and we wanted to get that airplane out of there and all that wreckage out of there. So the kid's name was Bisbee. He just died here a while back. Someone got a hold of me, and he put all the C4 they must have had available in 3-core on that airplane and blew it up. And I swear to God, there's probably still pieces of that airplane coming down out of the sky. It was just incredible. But he was just a young guy, just really enthusiastic. He had some problems with the CIDG. They just didn't understand him, but
they didn't like him, and I did not want to go out on an operation with him because he was not well liked.
Well, they threatened to kill him at one point.
Yeah, exactly. And my thought was, if they're going to kill him, they're going to kill the other American too, and I didn't want it to be me.
Yeah,
they didn't want witnesses, did they?
No.
But he died here about a year ago. Someone got a hold of me
Um,
that I'd known him.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
What was the issue? Just he just was an asshole or what?
Well, he
He was
called them
just
slope. He called them
Uh-huh.
slopes for one thing.
He
Oh,
was
yeah.
kind of
He had-
just a real, very immature, loudmouth punk kid. I mean, not to say speak ill of the dead, but he just was very
Yeah, I got you.
caustic personality, and they just didn't like him.
Was he as immature as a junior commo guy that was caught out there with a freaking stick?
Yeah, there's a couple of
stick
them, one of them
grenade with a
around.
hammer?
There was one of them around.
Well, you know, before I went to Vietnam and ended up in Boot Up, the seventh group, I was in the sixth group at the time, and the seventh group was charged with coming up with a 12-week pre-mission training program. So you had 6 weeks of Vietnamese language school, and then you had, you know, what is it like to be on an A team? And they had chosen Boot Up as the combat example, and that was the thing that we focused. I never, you know, I sat there in class half asleep at times. You know, I never thought I'd ever end up at Boot Up, but the point is that we received some kind of training on how to deal with the LLDB, how to deal with the CIDG, things that you shouldn't say, customs and culture, you know, stuff like that. So my question is that, did they continue to have that kind of program? Does anybody know, as you prepared later on to come over to Vietnam?
I didn't get it. I didn't get anything like that before I went over.
Okay, all right.
We had, when I got there in '68, we had about a 4-week called a pre-mission course for going to Vietnam. Everybody on orders went through it, and they did have something similar to what you talked about.
Okay. Yeah.
The counterpart relations would be pretty significant.
Right.
And during the time all of us were there, Charlie, Wade, and myself, we had really good relations. We had Dai Wee True, who'd been there for a couple of years. He had an American Silver Star for what he'd done during the siege. We had a Cambodian sergeant major who was just outstanding.
Yeah.
And we basically got along pretty well. We our strike force is a lot smaller. We used to make out the morning reports, and I think basically we had around 250 strikers most of the time. And we had 3 companies, Cambodian, Montagnard, and Vietnamese.
Right.
They got along. We had no issues, but they were separate, and we didn't take on operation together.
Right.
Cambodians had their corner of the camp, and the Vietnamese and the Montagnards. Towards the end, I was there. We kind of ran short on troop, and they sent up a bunch of most of the people in our program were there because they were allowed to stay in their home area by joining the CIDG program.
Okay.
And towards the end, I left there about March of 70, and a little bit before that, we were running shy of troops. So they actually sent a couple of platoons up from Saigon from a recruiting area. They weren't from that area, and Boot Up there was no way in or out of there except airplanes. There was no, you know, there had been roads, but they were closed off. Well, none of those people wanted to be at Boot Up, and they did everything they could to get out of there. And a bunch of them disappeared one time. I don't remember the details now, but they were last seen trying to cross the Song Bay River or down towards Song Bay, and apparently never heard of again. And I don't really remember any details about that, but they didn't want to be a Boot Up at all. And that was during they were there for the siege, a lot of them. And there was a lot of bloodshed during that siege. You can't hear mortars come in. And like Charlie said, there were 80 or more come in every day, probably more, day and night. And you just never knew you could hear rockets, but you couldn't hear the mortars coming in.
Sometimes you could hear them leave the tube.
Yeah. But there would be like 60s and 120s and 82s.
Okay.
And boy, they usually always got somebody too. I mean, Charlie Noyes came in there, like he said, he's just out of school. And that young man got dipped into it right up to his eyeballs from the first day. And boy, you talk about somebody who, you know, I'm going to give him all the credit I possibly can. That young man
They
just,
did.
there's a lot of people alive today because of Charlie Noyes. I'm going to tell you that.
Yeah, I see.
Mike,
Well, we never got mortared the 7 months that I was in Buddha, as I recall.
Oh,
We never got mortared.
Bill Herring wants to say something.
Bill, go ahead.
I want to say, I didn't want to say nothing.
Okay. You know, Mike and I were talking the other day on Facebook about a little girl that came into my dispensary there in the underground bunker at Boot Op. She had been hit by a piece of shrapnel from either a rocket or a mortar, which sliced her belly open from one side to the other. And all of her small intestine was laying in the dirt. And her mother picked her up and wrapped her up in a piece of muslin cloth and ran all the way from the Montagnard village into camp. I don't know what that is, 75 yards or so. Brought her into there and I unwrapped her, and her guts were just laying on top of her belly, covered in dirt and small pebbles and pieces of straw. I cleaned her up with several bottles of saline and mixed up some triple antibiotic solution and bathed her in that. Put a couple of ABD pads on her and wrapped her up and shipped her off to Benoit to the CIDG hospital. And about 4 weeks later, I think it was Bob Campbell and I were driving around down in the village. Bob was a Project Omega guy, whatever project that was there at the time with Andy Anderson. We were driving around and one of our strikers motioned me to come over to his hooch. And I walked over. He didn't speak a word of English and I didn't speak Vietnamese or Montagnard, but he motioned me over to his hooch and he pulled the curtain back from the entrance to his hooch and he called, and this little girl walked out. The most beautiful round brown eyes and a big smile, and that little girl survived. And like I told Mike the other day on Facebook, if I don't ever think about a single success in my life, medically speaking, that little girl was always a positive for me, because I became a PA after I left Vietnam. I went to PA school and I was a PA in cardiovascular surgery for 41 years and 4 months. And I've seen a lot of people die, and I've done a lot of codes, and I've done a lot of things trying to save people. But if I ever get discouraged about somebody that I couldn't help or that I couldn't save or that we lost, if I think about that little Montagnard 5-year-old girl, I always feel just a little bit better.
That's a fantastic story. I'm glad you told it.
That's a good one.
Real well. I was like 5 feet away when Charlie was doing that. We had a kind of a nice underground team house, like kind of a big family sort of room in the evening. And we, during that period of time, so many people were getting hit. They were dragging them down in there. And it's kind of weird. People start talking about where they live in their houses. And you look back, you remember living in a place where your living room where you live is like got dead people and wounded people laying all around and bleeding all over the place. And it's just kind of a surrealistic picture, you know, just even after it was all over, there were still blood stains all over the place, you know, but I sure remember Charlie working on that little girl, and myself and the camp commander's wife were working on another CIDG guy. All I remember is he had a small hole in his back and something was kind of poking out of it. He wasn't bleeding at all, but he died. And Charlie was busy taking care of that little girl. But boy, that's something I'll never forget, is that he had her guts spread out all over the floor, going over him with that saline solution, inch by inch, washing her off.
Well, stories like that, it seems to me it would add a great chapter to the history of Boot Up if somehow we could get them together. I don't mean just out and out war stories, but heartfelt stories like that. You think about it. I don't want to put any burden on Steve or anybody, but I'm just saying, when I hear a story like that, I know I went back to Lynn Steele when I a long time ago when I was trying to write my autobiography, which is still not done. And you know, I said to Lynn, I said, send me what you know, what you remember about Boot Up. And he wrote me a thing called Recollections of Boot Up. And if you know him, and you might want to ask him for a copy of it. This is, I thought some interesting. I haven't read it in a while. I got it on file. I could probably send it to you as well. But yeah, stuff like that. I mean, I could, you know, a little more lighthearted story. When Harry Golden was the team sergeant, he had a dog named Queenie, and the medics, Sam Allen and the other guy, Travis, I can't think, I think Travis was his last name at the time. And they had, Queenie had two dogs. One was called Midnight, and Sam called the other dog Shithead. You know, that was a typical SF humor, you know. And, but Queenie was clearly the team sergeant's dog. And when Harry was getting on a helicopter to leave, to go home to Fort Bragg, and he hopped in that Huey, and just as the Huey started to lift off, Queenie ran and jumped up onto the helicopter. She was going to go with him, and one of the guys saw her real quick and grabbed her. I mean, literally as the skid's going up, and I remember that, and you know, like I like to tell the story that you know, we were on all that red laterite dust and so forth, so there might have been a couple of specks of dust in her eyes at the time, but I saw a couple of guys turning their heads away and kind of wiping the dust away after we saw that. But that's because Harry took care of her. I don't know if you guys ever knew Harry. Harry was a 10th group guy, and he came to the team as an E7. He got there before me. He was old enough to be my father. He had a son in ROTC who a couple years later got killed in Vietnam as a platoon leader. And that's sad story. But Harry, when I got there as an XO, Harry took me under his wing. And I don't think he called me sir once. He always called me lieutenant, which was fine, you know. And when Captain Cox came in, he said, you know what, a team sergeant, yep, you and I need to go on operation together. And Harry goes, I only go on operation with the lieutenant, you know. And Harry was sent there to straighten out the NCOs of the team, which was his job. And towards the end of his tour, he was still an E7, and he had been promised an E8 stripe. You know, back in those days, there was no centralized promotion thing. And now his tour was ending up, and so far there was no E8 stripe in sight. So Harry was starting to hit the bottle a little bit too much, you know, and so forth. But he ultimately he went back to Fort Bragg. He made E8, and he ended up being like the escort NCO for Barry Sadler, you know. And he wrote me a letter, or he actually wrote a letter to the team. But in it, he said if I could ever get rid of this job, I said, yeah, don't buy any Barry Sadler records. He says, guy's a drunk. Harry didn't like him at all, but Harry was not an easy guy to get along with. I can tell you that. But Harry, you know, to this day, when I think about Harry, he took a young lieutenant like me under his wing. He told me the do's and don'ts, and he helped make an XO out of me, you know. I'll just put it that way. I didn't get much help from the captain, and then by the time Captain Cox came in, I pretty well established myself in the camp. But I would not have been able to do that were it not for Harry Golden. And I got to tell you a quick story. The night that Cox came in, we had a big briefing for him, and we're sitting there, you know, drinking beer, and we're briefing him and so forth. And Cox, I said, "Sir, I need to show you where you're going to sleep tonight." And he said, "Okay." So I took him over to the inner compound there, where the commo bunker was and everything. And we had another bunker there. It was kind of primitive. And I walked in there, and I said, "Here you are, sir. This is where you sleep tonight. You know, mosquito net on the bunk and everything." And he said to me, he says, "XO," he says, "yeah, in the morning, I want you to get a helicopter." And I said, "Why is that, sir?" And he said, "Well," he says, "fifth group policy says we don't get drunk on site." He says, "and the team sergeant, Harry Golden, was drunk tonight on site." I said, "Well, sir," I said, "you got to understand about this E8 situation. This is starting to get to him." I said, "Don't worry." I said, I'll take care of team sergeant, you know, like that." And he goes, "No," he insisted. "You get a helicopter tomorrow. I'm relieving the team sergeant," like that. Well, he pissed me off. And I said, "Well, sir," I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do." I said, "In the morning, I'll get 2 helicopters." And he said, "Why are you going to get 2? And I said, "Well, I'll get one for team sergeant and half the team. I'll get one for me and the other half the team." And I said, "And I'll leave some money for my bodyguards and a few other people." And I said, "And you'll be dead by sundown." And he looked at me, he says, "That's mutiny, Lieutenant. You can't talk to me like that." And I said, "Sir," I said, "just leave this thing alone." I said, you haven't even been on the ground 8 hours. I said, I said, "Let me handle the team sergeant. You spend a couple of weeks looking around. Then if you want to make some changes, then let's sit down and talk about the changes. Let's do this in an intelligent way." And he was just not going to have it until I said that to him. Then as I said it, I was going like, "Geez, this sounds like a script out of a B Hollywood movie," you know. And so I stomped out of that bunker, and I got a hold of Harry the next day, and I'm thinking to myself all night long, kept me awake. I'm going like, I'm a 23-year-old second lieutenant, I guess, or first lieutenant, excuse me. And I said, I got to go counsel this 42, 43-year-old team sergeant. And, you know, how do I go about this? And I lay awake at night and everything. And so I got a hold of Harry the next morning. We're having coffee. And I started to say something, and Harry said, "I know what you're going to say, Lieutenant." He says, "I got a little bit too much last night." I said, "Yeah, Top, you did." I said, "You know, new team leader's kind of pissed off at you." And he said, I won't do it again." I went, thank God, Harry kept me from having to, you know, pull up some sort of leadership thing there. And, but that's how Harry and I got along. And I think it's because that he had a son that was just about my age. And I think he was just sort of, you know, looking at the virtual reality of things. I had a lot of good conversations, late night conversations, sometimes late night drunken conversations with Harry. But Harry could teach you how to run a team. He could teach you how to handle various personalities. And he was a tremendous asset to Boot Up. And I can't speak enough good enough about Harry.
Let me interject in here on Charlie's comments, because his story was outstanding, but it was not unusual in terms of SF medics.
Absolutely.
The whole reason for the PA program is because of all of the training that had gone into SF medics and how good they were. That's why they had to keep them and set up a program to accommodate that. Now, this is not so much on the medics, but in BUDOP, one group of people I wasn't able to get hold of were two people from the Walter Reed team. There's a Timothy Sullivan, who's a doctor, and there was a Lieutenant Dwayne Armstrong, who I guess was Medical Service Corps or something, came out in '68 testing for malaria and other Far East insects and things. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get hold of either of them. I got hold of Sullivan's kid, but he says, well, my father's at 80 plus years old is still doing in practice.
You know, the Walter Reed team, I remember real well. Timothy Sullivan, his brother went through AIT and jump school with me. I knew him real well. And there was another captain, I can't remember what his name was right now. These were SF qualified MDs, and they were more specifically looking for, there was a widespread hookworm and ascaris among the local people. And they were doing specific work on these hookworms. And I ended up catching them. It took them a while for them to realize I had them. And they had this treatment. There were these 5 big red jelly pills you took. And I think they were called tetrachloroethylene. And they just knocked the shit out of you for a day. And later on, I had some medical issues. And I mentioned that. And someone says, boy, that stuff's not for people. That's for horses. And you're going to be lucky if your liver is all right. Well, apparently nothing bad happened for that. I did try to get a hold of a couple of those people one time, like you said, and I was unsuccessful. But the ones at BUDOP were pretty much specifically looking for worms. There was like the 2 MDs, and then they had a couple of enlisted medics with them. And I think they blood tested almost all the CIDG and all the CIG dependents and whatever. They were there for quite a while. I had a collection of ordnance. I had a bunch of VC hand grenades and some other stuff. I think Wade mentioned that. And I was deactivating them. It was easy to do in the combo bunker. And apparently, Dr. Sullivan became alarmed over that and went and complained to the team sergeant that I was doing that. And it bothered him. So the team leader we had at that time, his name was Boykin, Captain Boykin. He'd been in 173rd, one of the most outstanding officers I met in all the time I was in the Army. Anyway, he says to me, he said, well, I've had a complaint about your hobby. And he says, look, he says, if you got to do that, go out on the airstrip and do it. And that was all he said about it.
I know John Morgan. He's a fantastic guy.
Well, he was a really good guy.
Yeah, he is.
He made major, went down to, he was right after Daiwi Sylvester, who had already been mentioned, who wasn't very popular. And Daiwi Sylvester went down to B-34 as S3 or something like that, made major. And Captain Boykin also made major and also got sent to BUDOP or B-34 after that. And he said the first thing he was going to do was, since he outranked Sylvester, was going to call him to attention and give him a 30-minute drill on the hand salute.
Does he still live in Birmingham, Mike?
I don't know. I have no idea whatever happened to him.
Well, he was Captain Boykin was here in Birmingham for a while.
No idea whatever became of him.
Well, Boykin was in the 7th. He was in the 7th group with me.
Well, Steve's got his email address because he's on the list. He got the email about this meeting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, I called him in Destin, Florida.
Destin, Florida.
He did not answer. He did not answer. I have an email address for him, which actually is it looks like Bozo 5. But he didn't answer. Sullivan is in Colorado and in practice. As I said, I got hold of a relative and a couple of office numbers for him, but I never got him to talk.
Is Sullivan alive?
Sullivan is alive and in Colorado. By the way, you know that Colorado Springs is where the SF convention this summer is going to be.
Well, something interesting about that, I used to collect old guns, and I still got a lot of military guns and relics and things. And I was on one of the collector's sites about a couple of years ago, and somebody had bought one of these abandoned storage facilities, and he got inside of it, and there were a bunch of Sullivan's artifacts. There was like a thing full of medical gear, and there was no reference to him, and they were wondering whatever happened to him. It's interesting to know that he's alive. But somebody's got some stuff he had stored away, you know, not a lot of stuff. It was a couple of foot lockers just full of general stuff, but it was named to him, and I happen to know who he was. I'm glad to hear he's alive.
Well, we'll talk later, and I'll give you the phone number I have, and you can get hold of him there. The other guy was a lieutenant, and as a lieutenant, I don't think he was an MD, probably Medical Service Corps. That's a guy named Dwayne Armstrong. And I'm reading this from the Green Beret magazine article about BUDOP and the FEST team. And you're correct. I misread it here reading quickly. It was not malaria, but filaria.
Yeah.
Was the worm that you were looking at.
Well, there was another captain. I can't remember what his name was right now, but he was a parasitologist, was his specialty. But I think they were all SF qualified. They somehow, I just can't remember the other guy's name. I had it at the tip of my tongue, but
The other
I don't
guy's
remember
name,
Armstrong.
The other guy's name, if the other guy's name was Peter Bourne, he's another character that
No, I don't remember him either.
He was a psychologist.
No, the other guy, like Mike said, was an MD. He was a captain, shorter guy than Sullivan. And then they had a SF Master Sergeant medic.
Yeah.
That was with the team. Yeah.
I got lists of the team people, but I wasn't able to identify who was actually at BUDOP.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing they were studying was elephantiasis. Because our cover for B-57 was to work capo, which gave us a wherewithal to go off the compound and out into the villages. So, and to try and recruit people that way. So we'd often take the rare team out with us, and they came back with unbelievable pictures. I mean, literally, they took one guy's picture with elephantiasis, balls literally down to the ground. Yeah.
Hembree was the other captain. Hembree.
Yeah, I remember him as short and with glasses.
I've got a Stephen Hembree, but he retired as a colonel as a 33315. I don't know what that MOS is. Let me look for him over here.
I believe he was a parasitologist at one time. I think I was told that.
No, yeah, that's the doctor in Fest.
Okay.
He lived in Murphy, North Carolina last time I saw him, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
We are approaching the time for the Bunard camp. Some people are popping in here in that direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording and then turn the recording back on, so I make it a different file. You're welcome to stay along here. It's been a lot of fun having you here, and it's been a good conversation. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get the video posted, because it's got to be edited properly. Not that I cut anything out, but it just looks nicer when it has a beginning and an end. And Bonnie Cooper has been doing that for me, and she's overworked by everybody. So
thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah.
Take care, Charlie.
Everybody stay well and stay alive.
Trying my best,
Thank
Mike.
you. Go ahead, Charlie.
Mike, you take care of yourself, buddy.
You too, buddy.
Well, listen, it's been great. Been great seeing you guys again, a couple of you guys.